My wife, who usually helps me here, is away at the moment and in another city. And so she had to get us started. And so now that we're started, we can continue here. Very good.
Inshallah.
I'll be able to finish it. So, Alhamdulillah, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So, ladies and gentlemen, and dear friends, brothers and sisters, and whoever else is out there and out anywhere in any of those many dimensions that we seem to be interwoven with, who are listening, may it please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enlighten us all by means of this conversation. Now, we've been talking with Brother Leslie Terabesi, otherwise known as Abdul Karim, who's in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, but has been halfway around the world for many reasons, this way and that way and the other way, from Canada via someplace in eastern, the eastern maze of Europe. There you see. Um,
That's right.
I'm my roots are also in Poland. I met an old fella when I was in the army in Germany, just going back 50 years ago, and he said that he recognized my name. He was a librarian, and as I was signing out on the book, he recognized my name, and he said, "I know there was a Jewish family in Poland with that name." Yeah, yes, he knew them. So we talked a little bit about that. So anyway, I couldn't get to visit Poland. Did you ever get back home? Where you were born, dear brother.
Yeah, actually, in 1983, 16 years after leaving Czechoslovakia, I went back on my own to see my dad.
Uh-huh.
How do I put it? Mm, I was kind of breaking up with a girlfriend I had at the time, and there was this feeling of emptiness.
Ah, yes.
And I felt wanted to go back to my roots, to something
Yes,
familiar, and that
yes.
is always there
Okay.
for me, so to speak. So
Comforting.
that's
Yes.
how, yeah. And then the following year, actually, I told my brother about my trip, and he became so
Hmm.
enthusiastic. He also wanted to go. So we
Hmm.
arranged for another trip the following year, and he got to meet all his friends there, and they were indirectly my friends too. And in fact, he met his
Good.
next wife there. There was a lady
Is
that he
that
knew from
so?
high school.
Oh, very fruitful
Yeah,
meeting. Then. Very
yeah.
good.
So now she's
So
in Canada, and yeah, so it was amazing. Yeah, absolutely.
wonderful. Wonderful. Well, so here we are, a couple of white guys from Eastern Europe, at least our ancestors are now. And I've also spent time in Malaysia, so that's where Brother Karim and I first met several years ago. And we're surprised to see ourselves back in touch now. But Allah has His ways of doing things with us. And once they're done, and once you know what the direction is, and especially the purpose, you need to follow through with it. And so that's what we're doing. We've been talking about the history of Islam so far and the struggle between those who have become traditionalists versus the can I can say the rationalist without going into a radical position, I think. But this is a struggle that's been going on between people who refuse to just accept what someone else says, and they want to use their own gray matter to reason things out based on not just what someone says is knowledge, but based on what their own experience of knowledge is in this domain and other domains as well. So we have different opinions on what happened to Islam, and we have different factions. And all of you know that we have now the proverbial 72 or 73 sects, and only one of them is true. And so we're trying to sort out with this conversation and other conversations that I and other people like ourselves are having, what happened to this thing that we call Al Islam. I have people telling me now I'm a convert and I'm not an Arabist, so I have to depend on people like Brother Karim and others who are steeped in the culture and steeped also in the language of Al Quran to sort of sort things out for me as I'm trying to discern the scripture through that medium of other people, because I can't read it myself, you see. And even if I could read it myself, I'm not sure that I would trust what I was reading based on my own knowledge of or my own inabilities with language. So, anyway, we have people who are using their minds to sort things out. And they're saying, oh, no, that couldn't be true because it doesn't align with the Quran. And there are others who say, well, we have this set of traditions here, just like other religions have their traditions. They're parascriptural traditions, all right, which means that they're not part of the revealed so called canonized text, but they're parascriptural and they're, in some sense, hearsay. And so we have them saying, well, these traditions are more important and more significant than the scripture itself. And then they've made actual legal rulings about this, which have affected the lives of millions, if not billions, of people by now over the last 1,400 years, based on assumptions that these unreliable sources that are now sanctified, you see, are true. And basically, using the common term that my stepson likes to use all the time when he gets excited, wants to tell me something. Basically, you know, basically, um, something's wrong, isn't it? Something's wrong because after all this time, there's still this chaos and confusion and disagreement, and people are still trying to anathematize others for not being on the same page with them. Well, I can take this one step further before I hand the microphone over to you, dear brother, because I have a specific question. Um, if I take the position that I don't agree with you, I can still walk away and leave you in peace. But these people don't want to. And that's a sign of psychopathology, you see. Now, when it's on a mass basis, that's mass hypnosis, if you will, mass transformation. Um, so we have a conundrum here. You see, when we're dealing with this, because you've got people who swear that they're being guided, and yet they're willing to kill you, anathematize you, throw you out, marginalize you because you don't believe the same thing that they believe about their particular approach to religion. This is not peace. This is a form of tyranny. And when it happens on that basis, when you have so many people who are ready to trample you, just at the sound of a rumor, oh my God, that woman just burnt the Quran. And all you got to do is shout it out in the theater, fire, fire. And everybody's running. And they trample over each other and do irreparable damage in what they think is the cause of Allah. So I'm just opening up this can a little bit further here, brother, after this break that we've had, because I want to ask you a question now. How are you experiencing this struggle in this day? This in our contemporary time. We've talked about the history. What's going on now in the way that you perceive this hemming and hawing back and forth between these extremes of, this is the sanctified tradition and this is the Quranist tradition. So it's kind of like going left to right again, over and over again. And where's the balance? Is anybody seeking the balance here, dear brother?
Yes, thank you, Brother Omar, and thanks once again for having me on your very excellent show. And I was looking forward to being back on it. We were away in Lebanon actually for some time, attending.
Mm.
How do I put this? Let's call it a family function. And then when we came back to Malaysia, we stayed mostly in Beirut, but we visited other areas as well. And then when we came back to Malaysia, we spent another 10 days or so with the part of the family that we are talking about here. My daughter doesn't want me to talk about it. Oops, I already just mentioned her name. So sorry. But anyway, so I want to keep it a low profile. I don't know whether you can edit that comment out about my daughter. Maybe you can, because she might be angry with me if she sees this. But anyway, so that's partly why I was absent. But yeah, before I begin, let me just do my customary little do. I just need a few seconds. Thank you.
Of course, brother.
Yeah, thank you. So, right. And yeah, you raised many questions, and they are all valid and all need to be answered. I'm not sure which may be the best order in which to answer it. Would you like to put any question at the very top of
No, no, you just follow, shoot from your hip, brother.
All
Let's
right,
move
all
right
right.
to it.
So, okay, shooting from the hip, that requires a lot of practice.
That's
I hope I don't miss.
they don't
I
recommend
don't
it
miss.
either.
Yeah. Well, spontaneity is important, but then so is methodology, and we need to strike a balance. Okay, the word balance,
Yes.
right? Is anyone trying to do anything about restoring the balance? And I have good
Yeah.
news. Actually, there
Oh,
are some
okay.
people trying to do that.
Hmm.
The late Dr. Taha Jabir Alwani, the former director of the Triple IT Institute located in Herndon, Virginia, USA, in fact,
Hmm.
wrote a book that was published in 2017 called, believe it or not, Reviving the Balance. He uses the word balance in
Oh.
the.
Hmm.
And the subtitle runs something to the effect that there needs to be, we need to recalibrate or reset, perhaps is that, although he doesn't use that word, the relationship between the Quran and the Sunnah, because this relationship has been, I think, and I am referring partly to him, has been not established properly, you see, and there's much evidence to indicate this. And Shahrur also alludes to this grave error, I think, among
Hmm.
the Mufassirun, the ulama, who basically placed tradition above revelation when they declared that the Sunnah, which to Al Shafi is the same as the Hadith, when they declared that the Sunnah judges the Quran. So the Arabic expression says, "As Sunnah kadia ala Quran." Now, this was a principle of tafsir, I think, attributed to a scholar by the name of Awza'i, whose madhab, according to Yusuf al-Qardawi, has become quote-unquote obsolete. That's the word that he uses. But still, many scholars still stick to this idea from Shafi that the Sunnah explains, clarifies the Quran, you see.
Hmm.
Now, I think this is a very problematic proposition because what they have done when they elevated the Sunnah to be a judge is always in a superior position to that which is being judged, right? So here
Yes.
they are claiming that they are going to be judging the words of Allah, our
Hmm.
Creator and the supreme authority, there is in the universe or anywhere else. So they are basically subordinating the words of Allah to the words of human beings. In other words, to the various hadiths that allegedly help to clarify and explain the Quran. Now, explain again is based on a second false assumption or a serious misstep in the methodology of traditional tafsir and jurisprudence. And not only Tahajabir Alwani, but even his colleague and friend and former rector of the International Islamic University of Malaysia here, he was the second rector. They both agree that there is a serious problem with the methodology in traditional Islamic studies. And I mean, for example, Abu Sulaiman, Abdul Habib Abu Sulaiman is the fellow that I'm referring to, the second fellow, claims that we are taking the words of the Sahaba as if they were equal to or even superior to what the Prophet allegedly uttered, and that these statements have become unquestionable or even sacred. John Esposito of Georgetown University wrote in one of his papers that there was an Indonesian scholar by the name of Nurkolis Majid, who called for what Esposito referred to as the, I quote, desacralization of tradition, end of quote. And I think this is a well-taken point, because the problem with tradition is that it has become a competitor of revelation, it has become a partner of revelation, it has become a judge of revelation, and it has become sacred, in other words, holy or divine. And this, I think, was a huge mistake. And in fact, there's a sheikh in Saudi Arabia who I actually quite like. His name is Hassan Farhan al-Maliki. I'm not sure if he is still in prison. Hassan Farhan al-Maliki. He has some excellent videos on YouTube, and most of them are in Arabic, but some of them have English subtitles. He's a sort of Quran-centric chap. And he himself, in one of his videos, admits that he used to, I quote, worship the hadith, end of quote. Now, this is just unbelievable. So what has happened is that even one of my early books on the subject, I think, is entitled How Tradition Eclipsed Revelation. In other words, the hadiths have in some ways become more important than the Book of Allah, and that should never, ever happen. Yet, because of the traditional methodology, this has transpired, and it has to be set right. Now, just to give a couple of examples of how this came about, at least the Muslims, Mufassirun, the Shafis and Hanafis in particular, came to the conclusion that collectively, more or less, that the Quran, the Book of Allah, contains some ambiguous words. Now, they had the, what shall I say, audacity, or I don't know how they came to this conclusion, because Allah Ta'ala states very clearly that His book is a clear book. And we would not expect a lack of clarity in a book authored by none other than Allah, because that would imply that He did not express Himself basically clearly, and that He needs assistance from someone to help Him make Himself clear. Now, this is a very, very problematic proposition. And Shafi singled out two words, for example, as illustrations of words that are not clear in the Quran. And one of them was the salah, which is normally rendered as prayer, and the other one is zakah, which is the paying the poor Jews, a normal rendition. So now, he justified, he first made an allegation that there are unclear words which runs contrary to the Quran. So he departed from, departed, or I don't know whether I should say disbelieved, in the two verses which say, or all the verses which say that the Quran is clear, you see. Now to attribute lack of clarity to Allah, I think, is very problematic. But get a hold of this, as we say in Canada. How did the Mufassirun decide whether a verse or a word was clear or not? And I'm referring here now to a book called, published by Cambridge University Press, I think in 2007, if I recall correctly. The book was written by, I think, some Bosnian fellow. His name is Shukriya Hussein Ramic. And the book is called Language and the Interpretation of Islamic Law. And in that book, he said, he reports how the Mufassirun decided whether a verse or a word was clear or not. So this is what he says. I'm paraphrasing, but pretty close to the original.
Sure.
If they could understand the sentence or the word, then the text was clear. On the other hand, if they could not understand the word or the verse, then the word or the verse was unclear. Bingo. So now, I had to stand back and take a deep breath, because my goodness.
That's the actual reverse of what's happened.
Well,
it's their understanding that's unclear, not
exactly,
the scripture.
exactly. This never seems to have occurred to them, that the lack of
Mm-hmm.
clarity was not in the text, but rather someplace else, and more precisely in the brain of the reader, you see.
Oh my God. Okay.
So
Mm-hmm.
now, instead of taking the blame themselves for not trying hard enough to understand the text, they try to put the blame on Allah by claiming that, well, he used unclear words. So now, but we are such nice people, we are going to come to, we are going his
Oh,
assistance and help him make
no,
himself
no,
clear.
no, no,
Okay,
no, no, no,
yeah,
no,
but this is this
no.
brother. This is the traditional Sunni position.
Oh
So
my God.
now they open the door to the hadith. The
Mm-hmm.
hadiths come to the rescue, and not just a few books, by the way. The six books of authentic hadith that you find in the Sunni tradition is just the tip of the iceberg.
Yes,
In
of
the Sunni
course.
tradition, there are at least 54 other books. So the total of the Sunni books of hadith are about 60. And then the
So
Shia don't want.
let me just pause you a minute.
Go ahead,
I
go
want
ahead,
to
go
get
ahead.
this clear again because all of these names just don't always stick with me. You're saying that Shafi'i and Hanafi got together to take this position that God was unclear and they need to help him make things clear?
Well, I'm referring more to the schools of thought.
Okay.
I'm basically referring to Ramich's book. He
Mm-hmm.
basically, and he has an interesting, I have actually written a little bit about this.
Mm-hmm.
The both Shafis and Hanafis agreed, first of all, that there's unclear words or unclear expressions in the Quran. But when
Mm-hmm.
you look more deeply, he does not, Ramesh does not single out Shafi and Imam al-Shafi and Abu Hanifa directly, but
Mm-hmm.
he refers to their schools, their mazhabs, their schools of thought. That's how he puts it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So,
Yeah.
interestingly, the Shafis divided all words into two classes, clear and unclear. And
Mm-hmm.
then under the clear words, the Shafis have two subcategories, and under the unclear, they have two categories also. So altogether, the Shafis have six categories of words. Now the Hanafis went further. Like the Shafis, they also differentiate all words into clear and unclear, which I'm arguing is already a mistake because there are no unclear words in the Quran. There are only misunderstood words in the Quran, but we can come back to that later. So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, the Shafis follow the Hanafis follow the Shafis. Sorry, like this. Hanafi came before al-Shafi. So
Mm-hmm.
the Hanafis share with the Shafis the view that all words are divided into clear and unclear, but unlike the Shafis who only put two subcategories for each
Mm-hmm.
clear and unclear, the Hanafis, I believe they have altogether three. I need to double check this. Three subcategories, so for a total of 8 classes of words.
Mm-hmm.
And in each school of thought, whether it's Hanafi or Shafi, the so-called mutashabihat verses, which both render incorrectly as ambiguous or unclear, because the word mutashabihat does not mean unclear, it means allegorical.
Mm-hmm.
Tashabahat kulubuhum is a term in expression in the Quran, which means their hearts are similar. So the word mutashabihat implies similarity or allegory or perhaps metaphor, but it is not unclear. In fact, in literary works, allegories are normally used to make the meaning of something more rather than less clear. So
Mm-hmm.
here there are several problems. One, the allegation that there are unclear words or verses in the Quran. Two, a misrendition of one of the such verses as, the word mutashabihat. So, but
Mm-hmm.
what the significance of these missteps, the claim that the Quran contains unclear words, and therefore we need to go to the Hadith to bring us clarity. And Shafi, now I'm speaking personally about him, and this is he singles out two words, like I said, Salah and Zakat, and he claims that the Quran does not tell us how many rakat we have to perform, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
in other words, he makes a second allegation here that the Quran is incomplete, you see, that
Yes.
there's something
Right. Mm-hmm.
missing from, which is another mistake and not a small mistake because it contradicts what Allah says on the subject. Allah says that the Quran is not only clear, Haza Kitabul Mubin, but it is also complete. We have explained everything, kulli shay, in this book in detail, you see.
Yes.
So here the scholars are making two claims that run directly contrary to what Allah says in the Quran. Now, some of the traditional scholars are prepared to declare a person a kafir if he disbelieves in a single verse. But what are these gentlemen doing here?
Mm-hmm.
Already, quote unquote, disbelieving in two statements or two
Mm-hmm.
principles stated in the Quran in several places, by the way. This is not stated only a single time, that the Quran is clear and that it is fully detailed. Like, for example, Surah Al-Qamar, Surah
Mm-hmm.
54, in verses 17, 22, 40, and one other word, 28, I think, and 40, declares that we have made this, Allah says, we have made this Quran easy to understand and remember, you
Mm-hmm.
see. The Quran, this is another, I think, problematic assertion that traditional scholars make about the Quran when they claim that it is a difficult book. It is not. Their
Mm-hmm.
tafsir is what is difficult, if you ask me. And the hadiths
Mm-hmm.
are much more difficult to understand than the Quran. The hadiths themselves require, if you like, some kind of explanation or interpretation. But to bring that which is lower, the hadith, to explain that which is higher, the word of God, is really a travesty, really. So,
Mm-hmm.
what I'm suggesting here is that unfortunately, our traditional scholars, or some of them, can I use a little bit of Canadian colloquial English here? I would
Go
say
right
that
ahead.
some of them messed up real bad, and
Uh,
we need to with the methodology, you see,
mm-hmm.
because
Yeah.
these allegations that the Quran is unclear, that it is incomplete, basically by making those what I consider to be false statements. I'm not saying that they deliberately lied, but they were statements that are completely contrary to what Allah says in the book. But by
Mm-hmm.
making these allegations about the Quran, basically they are alleging that the Quran is less than perfect. But we are informed by Allah Ta'ala that this is a perfect book, you see, and there's, if it was from other than Allah, we would find a lot of contradiction there. And
Mm-hmm.
that's another statement another allegation the scholars make. They claim that there are many contradictions in the book. My
Yes.
goodness.
Mm-hmm.
Are they suggesting that Allah somehow contradicted himself?
Mm-hmm.
According
Well,
to Shah Waliullah, there were only, and they bring in the doctrine of abrogation to take care of this alleged of these alleged self-contradictions in the Quran. Shah
mm-hmm.
Waliullah claims there are only 5 cases of abrogation, but others claim there are as many as 200, and some even claim a higher number than that. So this is not a very major error in traditional exegesis. The assumption, the allegation, I would say shall I say the false allegation that the Quran contains contradictions. It is actually these statements that the Quran is unclear, incomplete, and incoherent. Basically, they amount to besmirching the Quran. They amount to belittling the Quran. They amount to making the Quran look as if it was from a human beings. Because yes, we human beings are sometimes unclear. We human beings sometimes forget to include details, and we human beings sometimes contradict ourselves. But Allah is not like that. You see,
Mm-hmm.
He is always clear.
Mm-hmm.
He always gives us the complete information, and He is always coherent. So these 3 assumptions on which traditional tafsir is based are completely wrong, and the result is that our understanding of the Book of Allah has become corrupted, because by making these false statements, the last one opened the door to the doctrine of abrogation, but the first two opened the door to bring the hadith, to bringing in the hadith to help clarify and complete the Quran, right? As if
Mm-hmm.
the Quran was imperfect. So this is a very serious problem in the traditional methodology of reading the Quran, and it has to change. The Ummah, as you know, is experiencing all kinds of trials and tribulations, and they stem in part from a misunderstanding and perhaps misrepresentation of the Book of Allah that is supposed to provide guidance to the Ummah. But the Ummah, somehow, the Book of Allah was not enough. They wanted something more. Even the people at the time of the Prophet used to tell him, bring us a different Quran or change this, right? There's a verse in the Quran according to that effect.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he said, I cannot change it of my own will. So what did they do? Well, they brought something else. They brought the books of Hadith, which, by the way, they claim are also revelation, brother. So they are
Yes.
claiming sanctity, and they are placing these books of Hadith on par with the Book of Allah. They are placing the words of human beings, they are making them equal to the words of God, and in some cases, they are even elevating the words of the human beings above the word of God. And they do it, when I said when they apply this methodology of explaining the Quran by the Hadith, the Sunnah Kadi ala Quran, what they are doing is that they are placing their own furqan or criterion or standard for differentiating truth and falsehood. They are placing this man-made furqan above Allah's furqan. Now, I was racking my brains over what do you call this, because I haven't come across any expression in the literature that refers to this phenomenon that identifies it as a practice. And I came up with the expression scriptural shirk. When you give a partner to the book of Allah, you are committing another book. When you are treating another book or books as equal to the book of Allah, you are committing what I would say you are falling into what I would describe as scriptural shirk or textual shirk. You are giving partners to the book of Allah. Now, a follow-up question could be, is it possible to give a partner to the book of Allah without giving a partner to Allah himself, you see? So what I'm suggesting here is that traditional tafsir is basically tainted by this scriptural shirk. And it doesn't end there. The same happens, something very similar happens in jurisprudence, where the rulings of Allah, jurisprudence is about law, the ahkam of the Sharia. In jurisprudence, rulings of Allah have been arbitrarily replaced, abrogated, and replaced by rulings drawn from man-made traditions. And we have examples, 3 major examples. The ruling on apostasy in the Quran was replaced by the death penalty drawn from the Hadith. That is another example of what this is an example of what let me give the second and third example first. The second example is when the stoning to death replaced the ruling of 100 lashes for adultery. And the third example is when no punishment for blasphemy was replaced by the death penalty for blasphemy. Now, in all these 3 cases, human beings were allowed by the ulama to overrule the word of Allah. In other words, the ulama have in these 3 cases allowed people, the narrators or the transmitters of the hadith, because we cannot take it for granted that these words of the hadith are the words of the Prophet. We know that the hadiths are paraphrases of what the Prophet allegedly said. So we should not attribute it to him. We should not hold him. I don't think he did it, but some of the transmitters, I think transmitted these hadiths, and these hadiths were then used to, believe it or not, abrogate and overrule the clear rulings of the Quran. In other words, human beings were elevated above God, because they were made into authorities higher than God himself. The ulama have given them power to overrule God's rulings. Now, what is this? How would you describe such a practice? So I came up with the sister expression. I'm calling it a juristic shirk. When the fuqaha have fallen into this trap of treating in some cases, the words of human beings as more authoritative and a source of legislation as more authoritative than the words of God, that this is a terrible catastrophe. And it explains why Islam explains a part of the Islamophobia that we see around us, and it explains some of the extremism you see that we have, even in the Sharia, because death penalty is an extreme penalty. And if it is prescribed for something that Allah never prescribed the death penalty for, then I would say whoever is prescribing this death penalty is going into extreme, and I, in fact, am prepared to call whoever did that, an extremist, you see? Yes. So this has brought, untold misery to the Muslims, wars and civil wars. And Lebanon had its share of them. I was just preparing some text which I will be publishing in hopefully not too distant the future. The amount of sectarian violence, brother, in Lebanon is just unbelievable. The Christians alone have something like 12 denominations there. But anyway, to come back to the main point, I think the ulama bear a degree of responsibility for all these fratricidal wars and civil wars because of their, what shall I say, extremism, their extreme exegesis, which is departs from the teaching of the Quran, the moderate teaching of the Quran. So I could go on longer, but I don't want to take up too much time. But I would just mention that another major corruption that happened based on the doctrine of abrogation was the invention of the aggressive jihad, spreading Islam by the sword. This is
Yes.
another unbelievable principle. And who came up with it? Well, among other people, Imam al Shafi, sorry to say.
Mm,
According to a book by Abu Zahra, where he's quoting Ibn Taymiyyah. Even Ibn Taymiyyah agreed that Shafi was the only one out of the four imams who basically endorsed killing non-Muslims just because they are not Muslims. In other words, not because they are attacking, the Muslims, but
hmm.
so he approved this doctrine of jihad al-talab, aggressive war, offensive war,
He,
and
he
the
personally
ulama have
approved it.
even made it into a sixth pillar of Islam. Now, how catastrophic can it be? And,
Mm,
and just two more. Yeah, absolutely. And if
mhm,
you would like evidence of this, well, have a look at a book called Tackling Takfiri Theology. You can find it on academia. It was published by the Quilliam Foundation. Majid Nawaz is
mhm,
a part of that organization. And the book was authored by Usama Hassan, who sometimes writes for The
mhm.
Guardian, and Saleh Ansari. An excellent book.
Uh,
It is basically a
I
response
remember
to
reading
the
security.
chief ideologue of
I, yeah. I remember reading security briefs there. I edited security briefs while I was in Kuala Lumpur because they had
Yeah,
been
there you go.
involved with
Yeah, so there you
the
go.
terrorists there, and they
Yeah,
attributed. I don't remember them citing Shafi'i, for example, but they did attribute this takfiri mentality to early schools of Muslim thought during the first couple of centuries. It's there, you see, this idea that they can just indiscriminately kill, you see, murder people who are quote unquote non-Muslim, you see. So this is not news to me. That Shafi'i sort of is one of those who originated. That's I think people need to understand that because most students are not aware of, first of all, of the gravity of that ruling or that he's responsible. You see, this is one of the things I'm glad we can clarify for some of our readers. And I don't want to get, we've covered this illegal killing and wars extensively in the past, but I have another question I want to ask you because there are political motivations that others whom I've talked to have made clear. And these are people who understand the history of the Middle East, the history of Islam, the history of these other cultures and that were and religions that are involved and how these things sort of work. So there was a political motivation that stems out of those pseudo Christian, Catholic, Orthodox, and old corrupted Zoroastrian Persians, all sort of got together with the disaffected Jews who'd been thrown out of Palestine by then for 1,000 years. So all of that is working as an accretion against Al Islam, and there are political motivations there. That's very clear from several conversations. But I have another question here. You see, the Arabic language was not fully developed at the time that the Quran was revealed. I mean, there was a high culture of Arabic traditions, but it was all oral. So that's my understanding. Now, I'm not a linguist and a historian in that sense. So I'm wondering, okay, how much of a problem was it to take that tradition of yet a still forming language and expression of verbal exchange and put it into writing? How much of that may have contributed to the misunderstandings that you have cited in the last 40 minutes or so? What do you think, brother?
Yeah, thank you. Well, the first thing that comes to my mind when you're talking about language is how Imam al-Shafi basically, once again, Shafi, sorry, I don't have a personal axe to grind against him because, and by the way, he wasn't the only one who endorsed this doctrine of Jihad al-Talab. Among others, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali also endorsed it, brother.
Yes, of course, yeah.
And also the Ibn Khaldun, who wrote the Muqaddimah, I found the passage,
I
so
was
of
so
course,
disappointed to hear that.
terrible, terrible. And not to mention, Ibn Taymiyyah and then Sayyid Qutb and Maududi. But anyway, Imam al-Shafi is well known. And by the way, did you know that Imam al-Shafi would read the Quran from beginning to end, recite the Quran twice a day, every day during Ramadan?
Oh
Imam
dear.
al-Shafi, yeah, this was reported about him. He would recite the Quran from beginning to end twice a day every day during the month of Ramadan, brother. My
Well,
source is looking.
sounds a bit crazy to me.
Exactly. The source of this information, you will find it in Brother Dr. Omar Rama, his book. I think you had him on your show at least once or more. In his book called Muslims' Greatest Challenge, Choosing Between Tradition and Islam, a brilliant book. I highly
Was
recommend it.
Brother
So he
Ramahi?
mentions that.
Yeah.
But what yeah. He writes it
Okay.
in his book. It was
Hmm.
published, I think, 4 years ago,
Hmm.
2019, by Black Palm Press. But anyway, the thing about Shafi, what gets me is that he contributed to this misunderstanding by basically, how shall I put it, falsifying the
Hmm.
meaning of one very important Quranic term. And the Quranic term is the word hikmah, which means wisdom. But he asserted that it actually means the sunnah of the Prophet, you see, which is, which is
Excuse
very,
me.
very
Yeah.
problematic. Yeah, the
Hmm.
word hikmah means wisdom. It does not mean the sunnah of the Prophet. The reason
Hmm.
why he came up with this shenanigan, I think, is because he wanted to justify turning to the sunnah as a second source of revelation, as a second source of legislation. If you ask me, what he didn't realize, what he was doing is that he was creating a second God by doing this, because only
Hmm.
Allah alone has the right to legislate in matters of deen.
Hmm.
And he was looking for a passage in the Quran that would justify following the so-called Sunnah of the Prophet. He could not find any such passage, so then he invented this notion that the word hikmah actually means the Sunnah of the Prophet. This was a very, very, how shall I call it? I'm not saying that he intentionally lied, but I think he was overzealous and he twisted the words. There are traditional ulama who believe that if your intention is good and you are seeking to achieve something good, you can even invent a hadith. There's a record of this, that some of the ulama
Hmm.
have believed it.
The
Uh,
noble
uh,
lie.
yeah, exactly. The noble lie. And there are many noble lies,
Hmm.
actually. Once you start lifting those
Hmm.
rocks, you will come across many of such lies. So,
Hmm.
in this way, by claiming that the word hikmah means the sunnah of the Prophet, he encouraged the people to read the hadith, to follow the hadith, you see. And in fact, he misled the ummah from the book of Allah to the books of hadith. I consider the whole, tradition now as basically a deviation from the book of Allah to the books of tradition. I know it's a very broad generalization, and I'm sure there are exceptions, but the mainstream position is that Islam has two sources, Quran and Sunnah. And in fact, when you walk into any masjid, you will see two names there.
Hmm.
They look like equal partners. And if you ask me, Brother Abdul Karim, do you have a name for that too? Actually, just before, a little while before we started this meeting, such a name occurred to me, and I would call it now. The term that came to my mind was, symbolic shirk, because
Hmm.
the symbolically putting the two names side by side with the equal size letters symbolizes partnership and equality.
Hmm.
So this is what happened. The Ummah lost its bearings from the time that the Sunnah of the Prophet, the Hadiths, were elevated to the rank of equality, and in some cases even superiority to the Quran. What I tell my friends and interlocutors on Clubhouse is that, look, I don't deny that the Prophet had a Sunnah, even though the Sunnah of the Prophet is not mentioned in the Quran. The Sunnah of Allah is mentioned, and the Sunnatul Awwaleen is mentioned, of the predecessors of Ibrahim and so on. That doesn't mean However, just because the Quran does not mention a sunnah of the Prophet doesn't mean he didn't have one. I believe he had one. In fact, in a sense, I consider myself a Sunni because I also follow the sunnah of the Prophet. But was the sunnah of the Prophet to follow Bukhari? No. Was the
Mm-hmm.
sunnah of the Prophet to follow Tirmidhi? No. Was the sunnah of the Prophet to follow Sahih Muslim? No. He couldn't follow any of those people because they didn't exist even during his time. But the
Mm-hmm.
Prophet did follow a certain book, and that book is the Quran, and it is the same book that I also follow. So whoever follows the Quran is actually following the real Sunnah of the Prophet. So even the meaning of the Sunnah of the Prophet has been dramatically corrupted and distorted in traditional Islam, which amounted to basically, the whole process amounted to basically a serious, well, a kind of a deviation basically from the straight path, abandoning of
Mm-hmm.
the Quran in favor of man-made traditions. So I'm not sure whether that answers your question or not, but
Well, that is the political motivation on the part of those who fail to understand what my um, uh, their religion fail to understand their religion, and then they take on their own selfish motivations. They become one of the selfish ones, and then politically organize against the cause of Allah in the earth, which is for us to become mature and attain unto the office of Khalifa. So the thing that I was trying to get to when I asked the question is how much of the transition from the oral tradition to the written tradition, when they were transcribing the Quran, did this linguistic problem contribute to early Muslim understanding? It seems to me that there was probably, and this is how it is with most of the so-called initiates or prophets over the years, from whatever the culture might be. There's an inner circle, and there are layers of, of sort of groups of people who are closer or further away from intimate relationships with both the prophet, the bringer of the scripture, or the bringer of the news, whatever the revelation might be, and the understanding of it. Those closest will have a greater understanding. So I'm thinking that there may have been a linguistic factor that contributed to a misunderstanding when the tradition went from the oral tradition of the Quran. I'm not talking about the Hadith now. Of the Quran went from an oral platform to a written platform because Arabic was just being established during these centuries as a written language. It hadn't. The Quran is actually one of the things that, to my understanding, helped Arabic to become written. You see, so that's what I was asking. What do you or do you not know about such a contribution from the that perspective?
yeah, you are right that the Quran actually was originally oral in form, and Dr. Ramahi emphasizes this when he refers to the transcript of the
Hmm.
Quran as the
Hmm.
Mus'haf. The Quran is the
Hmm.
oral
Musa,
recitation.
yeah. Hmm.
That is correct.
Yes. Hmm.
And now, uh, what I whether there was any distortion in transcribing the Quran from the
Hmm.
oral form, that is a good question. I haven't
Hmm.
really done a whole lot of research on that, but there are people who have pointed it out. Some, like certain
Hmm.
types of Arabic, do not use the diacritical marks, for example.
Hmm. Yes.
They have been added on. So there are some differences. I mean, Allah Ta'ala promised to protect the zikr in the Quran. And did He
Hmm.
say that He promised to protect the Mus'haf, you see? So the zikr, if the Quran is the zikr, then the Quran is protected. But does that protection extend to the written, copies of the Quran? Like
Ah,
Idib
yes,
Yüksel
yes.
and others have
Hmm.
got,
Yes.
gotten into some trouble when they claim that the last two verses of Surah number, 9, 128 and 129 have been added on because they seem to contain some problematic statements which
Hmm.
refer to the Prophet as if he were Allah. I mean,
Hmm.
kind and merciful, so on. But so But what I sense in the process of
Mm-hmm.
language development, and how do I put this? I have written a little bit about language and morality, and it's on my
Mm-hmm.
website. I mean, on Academia and ResearchGate.
Mm-hmm.
What I noticed in about language is that apart from falsifications like that done by Shafi, and also other falsifications where the word mutashabihat is rendered as unclear, or another misrepresentation where the word salah is interpreted as meaning exclusively ritual prayer or ritual prayer chiefly, while people have shown that the word salah has much broader meaning, such as connecting with someone, reaching out to someone, supporting someone, being committed to something, and turning to something, and so on and so forth. But what I sense and Dr. Ramaha gives another brilliant example of this change in the meaning when it comes to the word kalb, which is normally rendered as heart in 56 of the 57 translations of the Quran on islamawaken.com. And by the way, I know the fellow who's running that whole thing. He comes to our rooms from time to time. They are
Mm-hmm.
working on some translations of the Quran, and I think they have translated it already into 120 languages. But we can put that aside for now. So, out of 56 of the 57 translations, translate the
Mm-hmm.
word kalb as heart. Only
Mm-hmm.
one, and it's a fellow called Shafi, not to be confused with Imam al Shafi. That's another
Sure.
Shafi. He,
Mm-hmm.
he was the only one who translates the word kalb as mind, you see. And this is Dr.
Mm-hmm.
Ramai's contention that in original Quranic Arabic, the word kalb did not mean heart. It
Mm-hmm.
meant the brain
Mm-hmm.
or the mind. So when the meaning changed from brain to heart, the understanding of Islam changed from an intellectual understanding to an emotional understanding, you see.
Yes.
That's
Mm-hmm.
that's partly why you see so many Muslims ready to stomp on someone on just a mere allegation of having done something like burning the Quran and throwing
Yes.
acid in people's faces, being very
Mm-hmm.
emotional, in other words, and non-intellectual. So
Yes.
that's one major change that has taken place. And according to Ramich, who I quoted earlier in that book, Language and Interpretation of Islamic Law, there was at least half a dozen very key words in the Quranic Arabic that have undergone significant change. So for us
Mm-hmm.
to understand, I mentioned one or two examples. So for us to
Mm-hmm.
understand the Quran as it was intended by Allah to be understood, we need to rediscover those, the meaning of those words. And in order
Mm-hmm.
to do that, I think we need to free ourselves from traditional tafsir and commentary, because as, for
Mm-hmm.
example, once again, Dr. Amahi points out, he thinks that 95%, up to 95%, I think is the number he mentioned, of tafsir is really unreliable of the traditional tafsir. It actually muddies the waters rather than clarifies for us the meaning of the Quran. So,
I
in other
suspected
words,
that.
this is a major task that
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. And by the way, just one other thing, you see, I know you don't want to talk about the Quran, but I think if I may just add that the collection of hadiths was politically motivated because three separate caliphs ordered people to collect the hadiths. One was Ibn Hisham. He ordered someone called Al-Zuhri to collect the hadiths. Al-Mansur, I think, asked Imam Malik to collect the hadith, and then there was Umar the second. He also asked someone to collect and write down the hadith, which were at
Mm-hmm.
that time also in a purely oral tradition. And the scholars, according to Tahajjab Rawani, objected to doing it because they remembered that the Prophet prohibited writing the hadith. So according
Yes.
to Al-Wani, Omar the second was the first one who claimed publicly that the Prophet lifted his prohibition on the writing of the hadith.
Mm-hmm.
You see. So
Mm-hmm.
the origin of the hadith is very political, and the hadith served
Mm-hmm.
a political purpose, something like
Mm-hmm.
political propaganda, basically to make the
Yes.
enemies of the caliph look bad and to make the caliph look good,
Mm-hmm.
and to interpret the deen in such a way that would allow them to go back to their old ways of raiding neighboring countries, the so-called raids, and but this time under
Sure.
the guise of spreading Islam by the sword. You see. So
Yes.
they
Yes. Yes.
came up
Yes.
with a hadith like where the Prophet
Mm-hmm.
allegedly said, I was the God bless Prophet Muhammad who was sent with the sword as a mercy
Mm-hmm.
to mankind. Now they added the with the sword to a famous
With.
verse in Quran, Surah
Mm-hmm.
21, Anbiya, verse 107, where Allah says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. We have not sent you but as a mercy to the worlds. Now, show me the word
Mm-hmm.
sword in that verse. It's not there, you see. So
Mm-hmm.
the point is, hadith militant, Quran peaceful. So this is what the ulama did. They transformed the religion of
Yeah.
peace into a religion of conquest, expansion, and imperial, with imperial ambitions. And this was in the long term the downfall of the ummah, because
Yes.
eventually there was a pushback, as you know,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
they were the empires all collapsed, whether it was the
Yes.
Umayyad, Abbasid, or the Ottoman. They all collapsed,
Yes.
including the ISIS most recently. So anyway, yes, the meaning changed in the our knowledge of many of the words, and we need to rediscover the original meaning.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whether the change happened when the Quran itself was being transcribed, I really would need to look into it more detail to be able to comment
Mm-hmm. Well, you're not the only
I
one
think
I'm going to ask
further.
that question to. I'm going to ask that question to
There you
several
go.
people for the sake of our listeners
Of course.
and for the sake of my own edification. And with that having been said, and on that note, dear brother, I want to thank you once again for sharing your exceptional knowledge and opinion based on sound knowledge with us and with myself in particular. Um, we're undergoing some readjustments here at Al Ginkgo at the back end of the website. So um, we can't handle as many programs at the present moment. We might ramp up to it again in a couple of months or maybe even sooner. So let's try to do this every other week if we can, dear brother,
Yeah,
every other
for sure.
Tuesday. And as however it is that we are led. So I plan on setting you aside for Tuesday in 2 weeks from now, and we'll continue this conversation. I might have some more specific questions for you in mind next time. But I'm not going to let you know in advance because I like spontaneity and I like the fact that our audience can sit in and listen to a real conversation that's not that's unscripted and without some sort of ulterior motivation. All right, both you and myself we're about as far from being politically motivated as possible. So, I wanted to thank you once again, my dear brother. Thank you so much.
Most welcome, and thank you too, Brother Omar. So we'll see you
Wassalamu
inshallah in two
alaikum.
weeks. Wa alaikum salam wa
Yes, in
rahmatullah.
2 weeks. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brother Abdul Karim, thank you.